Imagine being on a crowded flight, trying to relax, when out of nowhere, a racist passenger targets a young black girl, demanding that her seat be removed. You might think this is just another case of ignorance, but what happens next will shock you. The girl's father, a calm and collected man, steps in, but he's not just any father. He's an FBI agent, and when he flashes his badge, everything changes. In this tense moment, the atmosphere shifts. The passenger who had been spewing hate suddenly freezes, realizing the power of the man standing before her. It's a standoff, but not in the way you might expect. The story doesn't end here, though. This interaction sparks a series of questions. Why did the passenger feel so entitled to make such a demand? How did the father remain so composed? And most importantly, what happens next when authority meets ignorance in such a public setting? Stick around as we dive deeper into this real-life encounter that highlights both the ugly side of prejudice and the power of standing up for what's right. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens after the badge is revealed. Stay tuned. As the situation unfolds, the young girl, no older than 10, sits in her seat, clutching her book tightly. She's trying to ignore the harsh words coming from the passenger behind her, but it's impossible. The woman's voice is growing louder, demanding that the flight attendants remove the girl's seat because she doesn't belong there. The nerve of this woman is shocking to everyone around, but it's clear she doesn't realize who she's messing with. The girl's father, a man in his mid-40s, sits across the aisle, watching the interaction unfold with growing concern. He had noticed the passenger's behavior earlier, her rude comments and cold stares, but had chosen to let it go. He wasn't one to make waves, but this time was different. When he saw his daughter's discomfort and the passenger's escalating demands, he knew he had to step in. Without a word, he stands up and walks calmly to the woman. His demeanor is unassuming, almost like he's just another passenger trying to diffuse a minor issue. But then, as the woman turns to face him, he pulls out his FBI badge. The look on her face is priceless. Her confident, condescending tone immediately evaporates, replaced by a flicker of fear. The tension in the cabin is palpable. Everyone is waiting for something to happen. But what will it be the moment the badge flashed in front of the passenger's face? The entire atmosphere of the flight shifted. The woman's smug expression faltered for a split second, but then, as if she were trying to regain control, she sneered and muttered under her breath. "What's this supposed to mean? You think I'm scared of you?" But the father didn't flinch. His calm presence seemed to tower over her, and for the first time, the woman's bravado began to crack. The nearby passengers, who had been silently observing, now exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered, others shifted in their seats, unsure of what would happen next. Was this just a misunderstanding, or had this racist woman finally pushed too far? The girl, still gripping her book, looked up at her dad, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She had never seen him like this before, not in all the years they'd been together. It was as if a new side of him had suddenly emerged, and she couldn't help but wonder what the woman had done to provoke such a strong reaction. It wasn't just a fight over a seat anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had clearly stirred her father to act. But the flight attendants, seeing the escalating tension, were now involved. One of them stepped forward cautiously, asking if everything was okay. The woman quickly pointed at the girl, insisting she was the problem. "This child is taking up more space than she deserves," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I'm just asking for a little respect." The father's jaw tightened, but he remained quiet. His gaze never left the woman's face, as though he could read every word she was trying to hide. Meanwhile, the passengers around them were starting to get visibly uncomfortable. Some looked at the girl with pity, others at the father with curiosity. It was clear that the situation was about to explode, but no one knew how or when. Would the airline step in to defuse the situation, or would the father be forced to escalate things even further? Just as things seemed ready to boil over, the plane's captain appeared at the front of the cabin, summoned by the flight attendants. He looked around, taking in the scene. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Everyone waited for his next move. Would he stand with the family, or would he side with the angry woman? All eyes were on him now, the final decision hanging in the balance. The captain stepped into the aisle, his expression unreadable. His sharp uniform and authoritative stance made him an immediate figure of power. He glanced at the woman, who was still glaring at the young girl, her face flushed with indignation. Then his eyes shifted to the father, standing tall beside her, his calm but firm presence impossible to ignore. The tension in the cabin thickened, as if every passenger was holding their breath, waiting to see how the captain would respond. For a long moment, no one spoke. The captain's gaze moved back and forth between the two, silently weighing the situation. The woman's voice suddenly broke the silence again. "I'm just asking for a little decency here. This child shouldn't be allowed to take up so much space. I'm paying for my seat." Her words came out in a sharp, high-pitched tone, but there was an edge to them that sounded almost like desperation. She had pushed so hard, and now it seemed as if she was losing control. The father's expression didn't change. He hadn't spoken a word since flashing his badge, but the subtle tension in his posture said it all. He wasn't backing down. The girl, still clutching her book, sat perfectly still, but her eyes flickered nervously from her dad to the woman, wondering what would happen next. The captain finally spoke, his voice low but authoritative. "Ma'am," he began, looking directly at the woman, "I'm going to need you to calm down." His words were simple, but the way he said them made it clear he wasn't tolerating any more outbursts. He then turned his attention to the father. "Sir, I'd like to hear your side of the story." The passengers could feel the weight of the moment. The air was thick with anticipation. Would the captain side with the father, a law enforcement officer with the power to escalate the situation further? Or would he give in to the woman's demands, choosing to avoid confrontation at all costs? The flight attendants stood back, watching silently, unsure of how the situation would unfold. The woman's face twisted with frustration as the captain addressed her calmly, while the father, despite the pressure mounting around him, remained cool and collected. He didn't seem to be in a rush to speak, yet his silence felt like a warning. The tension in the cabin was reaching its peak, and no one knew how it would break. Every eye in the room was fixed on the captain, waiting for his next move. Would he make the call that would change everything? Or would this chaotic confrontation continue, spiraling out of control just as the captain opened his mouth to speak? The sound of a phone vibrating echoed through the tense silence. The woman, her face contorted with impatience, quickly grabbed her phone and swiped the screen, her eyes narrowing as she read something. Her fingers tightened around the device, her knuckles white. The passengers could see something was off, as if her entire demeanor shifted in an instant. Without warning, she turned to the captain and said, "You don't know who I am, do you? You really think you can handle me like this?" The change in her tone was drastic. Gone was the haughty attitude, replaced by something darker, more calculating. "I've got connections. Big ones. You have no idea who you're messing with." The room went quiet again. This wasn't just an upset passenger anymore. It was something more. The flight attendants exchanged uncertain glances, and even the father seemed to stiffen slightly, as if sensing the shift in the air. The woman wasn't done, though. She held her phone up, showing something on the screen to the captain. "I've got friends in high places. I can have you removed from this flight without a second thought. So unless you want a big headache, I suggest you back off." Her words were laced with a new level of venom, and now it was clear she wasn't just fighting for a seat. This was a power play. The passengers shifted nervously in their seats, sensing that the stakes had just been raised dramatically. Was the woman bluffing, or did she really have the power to make things go horribly wrong? What kind of connections was she referring to, and could they change everything for the father, the girl, and the entire flight? The father's eyes narrowed. He hadn't flinched when she first threatened him with her words, but now there was a tension in his jaw that hinted at something much more serious. What was it about this woman that had caused such a sudden shift in behavior? His calm resolve had worked so far, but could he stay composed in the face of this new threat? The captain, his face unreadable, glanced at the phone, then back at the woman. "Is that a threat?" he asked flatly, the words hanging in the air. The woman didn't answer directly, but the message was clear, and in that instant, a new layer of fear rippled through the cabin. Was this about to turn into something even bigger than a simple confrontation over a seat? Was the woman really playing a game she knew how to win, or was she just desperate enough to throw everything into chaos? Every passenger now sat on edge, wondering how this battle of wills would unfold, and what the father would do next. Would he reveal more than just his badge? Would the woman's supposed connections be enough to break the stalemate? The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, and no one knew how this moment would ultimately end. But one thing was certain, nothing was going to be the same after this. The captain took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the woman's phone once more before he turned to the father. "Sir, do you have anything else you'd like to share?" His voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension now. The entire cabin seemed to lean in, waiting for the father to react. The man's grip tightened around the armrest, but he remained silent for a moment longer, his calm demeanor unwavering. He glanced briefly at his daughter, still sitting quietly, her eyes wide with confusion. Then slowly he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a second badge, a different one this time. The sharp gleam of it caught the light, and the passengers gasped, murmuring amongst themselves. The captain stiffened as he recognized the insignia. The father wasn't just an FBI agent. He was part of a specialized counterintelligence division, an elite force with far more authority than anyone on this plane could have imagined. The woman's smug expression faltered, and she looked momentarily stricken, as if she had miscalculated everything. "Is that the connection you were talking about?" the father asked, his voice calm but with a hint of cold finality. The woman's face drained of color. She was no longer the one holding power. She was suddenly the one who had made a grave mistake. The captain stepped back, his posture tense but respectful. "It seems you're in the presence of someone who's far above your pay grade, ma'am." He turned to the flight attendants, signaling them to prepare to escort the woman off the plane. But just as the woman opened her mouth to protest, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out from the back of the plane, cutting through the tense silence. "Excuse me," the voice said, calm but commanding. All heads turned as a man stood up from his seat, his posture just as confident as the father's. "I think you've got this all wrong," the man said, walking toward the front. "That woman's not who she says she is." He pulled out his own badge, another law enforcement badge, this time from a different agency. "I'm actually the one investigating her. She's been impersonating an official for weeks." The entire cabin erupted into a low murmur. The woman's face twisted in panic, realizing her web of lies was collapsing. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The father's eyes narrowed as the second agent approached, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the two men were about to have a quiet exchange. But before anyone could ask questions, the father gave a slight nod, and the two agents moved in unison to secure the woman. The passengers watched, stunned, as the woman was escorted off the plane by both agents. Her attempted power play had backfired in the most spectacular way. As the chaos settled, the father returned to his seat, his daughter now standing beside him, her hand in his. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her eyes were still wide with disbelief. "I'm fine, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The captain, his face pale but resolute, took a deep breath and announced over the intercom that the flight would continue as planned. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the atmosphere finally began to relax. But the passengers would never forget the tense moments they had just witnessed, the woman's threats, the father's unexpected power, the second agent's timely intervention. What had started as a simple dispute had spiraled into something far bigger. And as the plane ascended into the sky, everyone knew that sometimes appearances were the last thing you should ever trust. As the plane soared higher, the tension finally lifted, and the passengers slowly began to relax. The father and daughter shared a quiet moment, the chaos of the past hour now behind them. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with admiration. It wasn't just that he had stood up for her. It was that he had handled everything with such calm strength. The world may have tried to break them down, but he had shown her what it meant to stand firm in the face of injustice. The other passengers, too, seemed to breathe a little easier, their eyes now full of respect for the quiet man who had diffused a potentially dangerous situation. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, their movements smoother now, the crisis resolved. The captain, though still clearly shaken, managed a reassuring smile as he made a final announcement. No one would ever know the full story behind the woman's deception, why she had pretended to be someone else, or what her real motives had been. But in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that, in a world where hate and power could so easily run rampant, one man had done what was right, even when it seemed impossible. And for the father and daughter, it was a reminder that no matter how dark things got, there was always the power to do good, to stand up, and to fight for what was right.